This looks like The Departed with uglier people.
Comedian Jeff Ross involved in a death penalty case? Law&Crime's Elura Nanos comes on to explain this unique legal issue. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Comedian Jeff Ross. That is a name that you expect to read maybe in the entertainment tabloids, maybe on a Comedy Central roast lineup, but I bet you wouldn't have expected to read his name in a written brief to the United States Supreme Court. That is because he is involved in a death penalty case. Let me take a step back. Let me explain this. So back in 2015, Jeff Ross visited the Brazos County Jail in Texas with a film crew where he spoke to the inmates. He did a stand-up performance, all of this for a comedy special. Now, one of the moments that was caught on film but didn't actually end up in the final product was an exchange that he had with a man named Gabriel Hall, somebody who was locked up. He was an inmate at the time. He was awaiting trial. And during their exchanges, they kind of riffed off one of another, and Hall made a few interesting comments. Here is the problem. Only a few months after that taping, Hall would be found guilty of murdering Navy veteran Ed Shar, shooting him and stabbing him to death, and also the stabbing of his wife, Linda, in their home back in 2011. She actually survived. And according to Hall's attorneys, those comments that he made to Ross were improperly used against him during his sentencing, where he was ultimately sentenced to death. So now they are appealing this. Let me bring in lawyer and writer at lawandcrime.com, Elura Nanos, one of my good friends, one of the first people that I met here at Law&Crime. Elura, it's good to see you.
Hey, Jesse, it's great to see you too.
Do I have the facts right? Is that what happened here? I mean, what did I leave out?
No, well, you left out one thing that to me seemed like kind of a big deal, which is that Gabriel Hall at the time of his trial was 18. So putting aside how we feel about the death penalty sort of generally, it's bizarre to me to think that prosecutors would take this unorthodox road to getting a death sentence against a teenager by using footage from a professional comedian inside the jail. The whole thing is bizarre.
Well, here's the thing, right? So I see it as a number of issues. The first issue I see, and correct me if I'm wrong, are his lawyer said no one should have contact with him without coming to us first, without our consent, right? And wasn't that a big issue that they had no idea that Jeff Ross was coming there and was about to speak to their client?
That's right. It is a pretty big issue. And the circumstances of Ross coming into that prison also seem pretty bizarre. So, first of all, the prison told all of the inmates that as long as they sign a release, anyone who wants can be part of this comedy taping. Then the prison posted flyers around to basically encourage people to sign up and be involved. Then in comes a 9-person Comedy Central camera crew and Ross into the prison where, according to Hall's attorneys, they come in and go directly to Hall. So it wasn't sort of a general thing that just sort of happened and unfolded. It actually sounds like, at least from their telling of it, this crew went in purposely to elicit some sort of statements from Hall.
Well, they interviewed a bunch of people, but they didn't actually use him in the actual special. So that's the part that confuses me. Why didn't they include him in the special?
Well, my understanding is just that this whole section didn't air, and I'm guessing that what happened is right after the taping, Hall's lawyers found out about it, started filing all sorts of petitions, and Comedy Central certainly wasn't going to get involved with any kind of liability.
Because he was convicted of murder. And what were the problematic statements that Hall made to Ross?
So, reading over the transcript, because of course the tape's not available, but I've read over the transcript of what it says in the tape. And, you could easily see how this is the kind of thing that would be very persuasive to a jury. Because essentially what it is Ross asking Hall a bunch of questions about how he sees himself. Things like, would you ever hurt a fly? And he said, no, I'd never hurt a fly. And meanwhile, he murdered someone in cold blood and almost killed another by stabbing her.
And just to follow up, didn't Ross come back with that and said, okay, you wouldn't hurt a fly. What about a human? And then Hall said, oh, they're annoying.
Yeah, right. And Ross said to him, so like, what are you in here for? Like hacking somebody's computer? And Hall says, yeah, something like that. I mean, It's murder. It's nothing like hacking someone's computer, and I do think that I could see how that might be funny depending on the way that it's played in a comedy special. I also could see how it would be pretty dramatic when shown to a jury that someone who committed such a horrendous and violent crime would then minimize it in that way. That it really is kind of telling about what he thinks about his misdeeds.
See, here's the thing that I look at it. Free reign to use it. Free reign to use it in my way, because he chose to speak. Yes, he was young, but he chose to speak to Ross, and you could say he was riffing off of it. But to make these jokes when he is about to go on trial for a really sadistic crime, and talking again, just to follow up, what are you in here for? Hacking somebody's computer, something like that. Another inmate says, hacking is the operative word. And he talks about how humans are annoying. W- I'm not sure how that could be a successful argument from his attorneys to say this shouldn't have been used. It's improper, when I think it goes to his state of mind and it goes to whether or not he shows any kind of remorse.
Oh, well, I think that you're right in terms of it being highly relevant. I agree it's highly relevant to his state of mind. The problem is, A, it's likely overly prejudicial, and B, he had a right to counsel. And in this case, the prison really was the entity that coordinated the logistics with Comedy Central. And, you're not supposed to do that without the person's attorney being present. So I actually think it is a pretty serious Sixth Amendment issue about whether or not, a teenage inmate should have been allowed to do this without having an attorney present. And here it's not like the attorney signed off on it and said, "Sure, go ahead, go appear on camera." The attorney didn't even know about it. So I think that that's actually very problematic. But Jesse, between you and me, I don't think the Supreme Court's going to take the case.
You don't think they will? You don't think they're at least interested in hearing this?
No, I don't think they're going to take the case. I mean, I could be wrong, but I just don't think that they're going to. And the reason why I don't think so is because I think it's a complicated issue. And I think that the justices are not going to be excited to use this case of this heinous murderer to then come out and make a statement about the Sixth Amendment and right to counsel. I think that if they had to rule on it, they likely would rule that Texas violated the law, but they're not going to want to do that in this case.
Is that because what he did was such a terrible crime that you could say, of course they were going to come back with the death penalty? And if there was a situation where you had a defendant where it was kind of on the middle, but then these comments came in and were the deciding factor, maybe that's a case that would take up. Am I looking at? You see what I'm saying?
I do think that is perhaps where it goes. Although I will say, if we're going to characterize, the heinousness of various violent crimes, we do have the fact that this guy Hall was only 18, and he does have kind of that standard background of major abuse and neglect, major trauma in his childhood. So it is the kind of case that wouldn't not have been a slam dunk for the death penalty. But we've seen, especially in recent years, especially with the Supreme Court, the justices are very hesitant to get involved in death penalty cases, and they almost never rule to undo a death sentence at all. So I don't think that I don't think this is the kind of case that they want to use to make a statement about. And even if they did take up the case, it's very unlikely that Hall's sentence would ever get reversed based on this Supreme Court and how it usually makes death penalty decisions.
Do you think Jeff Ross is in any kind of jeopardy? Do you think he did anything wrong? His perspective, I would imagine, based on what I'm reading, is, hey, I was trying to, go to the inmates, bring them some comedy. Yes, they committed horrible crimes, but they're humans as well. I think he actually said one of the reasons he did it is because he believes in second chances. Do you think he did anything wrong here?
I mean, I think that there's a question of morally wrong versus legally wrong. Legally wrong, I don't see that he did anything wrong. He had the right to go in there. He was doing what he does, and I don't really see a legal problem with that. He didn't cause any harm per se. And you're talking about, should he feel sort of guilty about contributing in some way to a death sentence for someone who was a heinous murderer? I think we just as easily could be having a conversation about whether he should feel that he contributed to justice, because many people probably think that is the outcome of this case. But if I'm Jeff Ross, I don't want to be anywhere near anyone's death sentence. I mean, I think that's really the issue at heart. It's not, is it okay that he asked these questions? Is it okay that it was used in a Comedy Central special? I really think that the issue at heart is, do we want to use creative methods of getting people sentenced to death? And I certainly don't want that. I think there's a lot of people that don't want that. And I would be shocked if I heard that Jeff Ross would want that. So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he has at least mixed feelings about this, but I don't think that he's in any kind of legal jeopardy over it because I don't think he broke any laws or anything like that.
And if I'm reading it correctly, I think at the time of this recording, Jeff Ross hasn't made a statement about it. But it is a weird case. I think the Supreme Court might take it up. I could be wrong, but Elura, I need you to cover more of these kind of unique legal cases so I can have you back here on Sidebar. It's always a pleasure talking to you, and now I get to talk to you on Sidebar. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Jesse. Thanks so much. And if the Supreme Court does take it, I expect to be back here sorting out the oral arguments with you.
And I will say I was right and you were wrong. That's exactly what it'll be. And that's all we have for you, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here on Sidebar. We really do appreciate it. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.